Calculation determines 99% of your success in chess. Hikaru Nakamura is one of the best guys in the entire chess history to learn how to calculate the variations properly. This is exactly what we are gonna do today. I'm gonna decode the entire calculation process of Hikaru Nakamura so that you can apply it in your own games to win 10 times more than you currently do. What's up, chess player? Welcome to the Journey to Grandmaster, the place where you can improve every single aspect of your chess game. Let's start with a simple exercise here. Can you play two moves like Hikaru Nakamura himself? It's black to move, find the winning combination. Okay, I hope it was a kindergarten task for you. Black to move. Now, how do you actually find it? So, first of all, you always and always, doesn't matter if you're a beginner or you're Hikaru Nakamura, you must start with a 4-step system formula to find the best move in every possible chess position. The formula is checks, captures, threats, and active moves. So first of all, you're always, no matter what happens, you always look for checks. Because if you do have a check and you start with something else and you end up liking that move, chances are you might miss a golden opportunity, because checkmate is the ultimate goal of playing chess, and check is like a first step to achieve that. You need to attack your opponent's king to give a checkmate. So that's absolutely the first thing to keep in mind. So here, the two possible checks are rook to a1 and queen takes a3. There are absolutely no more possible checks for black here. And we, of course, have to calculate all of the checks at our disposal. Once we see a check, or later on, once we see a capture, we never automatically just do it. Of course, if we have at least a few seconds on our clock. Instead, we try to calculate the variation a little bit further. To do that, we are thinking, okay, what can our opponent do? First of all, if you are moving any of your pieces, the first thing you should ask yourself, what's gonna happen if my opponent takes that piece? First of all, can he take that piece? And if he can, what's gonna happen in this case? So let's start with rook to a1. In this case, the king will take it. Now we do have queen takes a3, because remember, for the second move in our variation, the principle remains the same. Checks, capture, threats, active moves. We don't change anything. So queen takes a3 is basically the one of two only checks. Another one is bishop takes b2, but queen takes a3 seems to be more aggressive, more active. Now the king is pinned, so the queen cannot be taken. King goes away to b1, and then the only possible check, yeah, actually there are three of them, but all of them are just losing the queen or exchanging the queens. The attack is over and we lose the game. So that variation doesn't work. The second one is queen takes a3. In this case, there are two possible ways for white to take it, and once again, we must calculate both. Now, if pawn takes, then we continue with checks. Remember the 4-step system formula. Rook a1 is the only possible way to give a check for white, but it's sufficient because it's a checkmate in one. The king has nowhere to go. Now, if after queen takes a3, king takes, we once again have rook a1 the only reasonable way to give a check this time, because there are bishop b4 and bishop b2, but both moves are just losing the bishop without any chances afterwards. So king takes a3. Now we once again have rook a1. That is a checkmate in one, so that is the right move. Queen takes a3. Brilliant move here. Brilliant queen sacrifice runs into checkmate here. Rook to a1. The game is over. Now that was the kindergarten level. Let's now go to the first grade of school and see what Hikaru Nakamura does to outplay his extremely strong opponents, and how you can do the same thing against your hopefully slightly less experienced opponents. There is absolutely astonishing chess game that is gonna teach you so much. Hikaru Nakamura played as black against Mikhail Krasenkov, who is famously known for his incredible theoretical knowledge. He wrote so many books. So let's take a look at it. Knight f3, knight f6, c4, e6. Nothing special in the opening, and that is normally the case nowadays when super grandmasters are playing. Of course, they are all incredibly educated in the first 20 moves. If we are talking about mainstream theory, they can just play with closed eyes, and there is absolutely nothing to be surprised about, because they're just executing the moves from the computer. b3, a5, you see the book sign everywhere, it's still a theoretical line. d4, and finally the game is about to start here. Queen to c2, b6, and white plays e4. White is trying to say, well, look at me, I have 3 central pawns here, I'm so active, whereas you have just 1. I'm gonna play e5, attack your knight, the knight has to go somewhere back, and you will never get an opportunity to raise your head. But we are talking about Hikaru. It's not a guy who wants just to stay there passively, wait for his opponent to make mistakes. No, Hikaru always wants to go forward. He always tries to be as active as possible. He wants to be in the driver's seat. He wants to dictate his terms. I mean, I have played against Hikaru in the Title Tuesday. I know how it feels. Although that was a tremendous game, take a look at it here. Definitely, I mean, I was absolutely amazed with what Hikaru said about me after the game, but back to the point, Black has to find some source of counterplay. You cannot, even if you are not Hikaru, you can never just wait for your opponent to come at you and destroy you with all of his potential. You need to create your counter threats, and that is exactly what Hikaru does. Even though the chess.com review says it's not the best move, it's an inaccuracy, but it has a very concrete tactical idea, and here it goes. So how do you spot those ideas? How do you come up with it? How do you decide what you do in the chessboard? First of all, you make this decision that you cannot be too passive. If you do that, your opponent, if he's smart enough, and probably he's gonna come at you and destroy. So you need your own threats. Here, Black is creating that threat to take the c4 pawn. And of course, Hikaru didn't just make this move hoping for the best. No, he calculated some variations, namely what's gonna happen after e5. Because remember, White just played e4. And whenever your opponent makes a move, that is a golden rule. You always think, what is the point behind that move? What is your opponent dreaming of? What is he hoping for? What is the threat for you? So of course, e5 is attacking the knight here, but Black just goes away for now and prepares to attack it with the move f6, trying to somehow get more space in the center. That's one of the ideas possible. And then put pressure on this e-pawn. If it takes, then the knight might go back, or the bishop might go here, getting some more space. Of course, there is a drawback though. The e6 pawn can be very, very weak here. The second idea is, of course, to attack that pawn on c4, and notice that it's pinned there, the rook is hanging behind that. So yes, as white, I would definitely play here e5, no question about that. I so much like to get that space, that initiative. I mean, that is just ultimate goal for you in chess, to grab as much space for you as possible and to leave your opponent as little as possible, because then it becomes more comfortable for you to play and more difficult for him. Anyway, knight to e8, now probably knight to e2 should be played just to protect that pawn, and then Hikaru wants to remaneuver this knight to c7, maybe get some ideas there, maybe get some ideas here now that the pawn on e6 is protected. So there are multiple ways to shuffle your pieces around and try to put that pressure on the center, because yes, white is controlling it, but if somehow you're able to control to attack it from different sides, then you get your chances. If you are going to just shuffle pieces around in your small part of the board that you control, it's never going to work out. So let's see what actually happened in this game. Instead of playing e5, white played the move knight to d2. That is kind of a typical idea, but I just don't like going back if you have a way to go forward. Like Hikaru literally never does it, and I recommend you never do it. Just never go back unless you absolutely don't have any active options to go forward, which is not the case here because white could have played e5. Let's see how Hikaru punished this passive move back. He plays c5. That is an incredible move, starting the entire madness, craziness on this board, because look at what happens. It's a little bit counterintuitive, because now this bishop on g2 becomes more active. The d5 pawn is not that well protected, but it's a price you pay for creating a threat for your opponent, because this d4 pawn is hanging, and that happened only because this knight went from f3, where it was protecting the pawn, to d2, where it's not. It's a passive piece now, and it's blocking the bishop, not allowing another piece to protect the pawn, and also not allowing this rook to protect the pawn. So d4 is hugely compromised by this move knight to d2, and Hikaru immediately uses this thing. So that's what strong players are doing. Once your opponent makes a move, they are thinking, okay, what has changed in the entire position? Yes, first of all, this knight is now on d2, so you consider what kind of new options it has. But also what you should do is to think, okay, the knight is not on f3 anymore. What has changed because of that? What the knight was doing on f3 that it's not doing now? Namely, it doesn't control all of those squares here. And then the next question you ask yourself, how I might use it, what I can do about it. And Hikaru found a perfect way here with the move c5, because now if you just take it, of course the idea is not to take back, but to go forward with this incredible pawn, and then ideally you want, for example, the knight goes back here to e2. Ideally you want just to shut the entire pawn structure here, making this pawn protected passer, and very important, block this guy on g2, because it's just screaming at this pawn on e4, get away from my way, let me be a very strong piece here along the whole diagonal. And so, yeah, eventually black wants to do it. Maybe first bishop takes e5, because at some point we need to take that material back. And now e5 is coming from either of the sides. And I guess the problem is, if you do it as white here, I'm gonna just sacrifice my exchange, because that diagonal is so important that you are more than willing to sacrifice the exchange, and I'm 100% sure Hikaru would do that here, because look at this beautiful diagonal for black pieces that is going to be dominating. The engine screams that it's completely winning for black now, and it's absolutely no surprise. So remember about those bishops on g2 or b2, how powerful then can be, and how miserable you can be if you take this bishop away, even for a rook. Let's go back to the actual position here. Instead of taking on c5, white took on d5, which makes, of course, much more sense, because, well, white still wants to open up this bishop, and white has more attackers for the d5 pawn. And of course, before playing the move c5, you must have calculated what's going to happen in this case, because the same principle which have just learned for your opponent in terms of what has changed in the position once he's making his move applies to you. Before making the move c5, should try to understand what's happening on the board, what changes in the position. Namely, this pawn on d5 is not protected that much anymore, and what happens if white takes advantage of that. Well, guess what? Black still doesn't care and takes the pawn on d4, because that pawn is really important. That is a move with a tempo attacking this guy on c3, and yeah, the craziness begins here. Everything is hanging. Knight goes to b5. Now, of course, there are just so many different options. Knight to b5 is basically the only move that maintains the balance here for white. And there are so many alternatives, so even finding that move is already pretty complicated. And that is what Hikaru tries to achieve. He tries to get you into a difficult position where you have the only way to remain solid, to maintain the balance, or maybe get some advantage. Otherwise, you are gonna be much worse. That is the best thing you can get, to put your opponent under pressure, because under pressure people tend to make mistakes. We are all human beings. But to achieve that, in the first place, you have to be active. You have to make those moves like c5. You have to be willing to sacrifice something, to pay a certain price for it, to get this type of activity, to make it complicated for your opponent. And that is what Hikaru does his entire life. So let's see what happens. Knight goes to b5 here, and now Hikaru takes here on d5, which for some reason they say it's an inaccuracy. In fact, if you take it engine evaluation, it says it's one of the best moves here, not really worse than anything else. The alternative is to take on b5 immediately, but I like this choice, because now you cannot just take it back. The knight is hanging, and, well, you once again need to take this complicated decision, because if you take on b5, it's easy for white to decide what to do. Or maybe not entirely easy, because if you just take it on b5, then I'm gonna take with the knight, and black is having a very, very comfortable position. So you don't have any real choice. You have to take here on e6, attack and get another piece. Now the bishop is hanging, the knight is hanging, black plays rook to c8, takes, bishop takes, and we have a roughly balanced position, which is quite simplified. So I guess that is the reason why Hikaru didn't want that. Instead, what he did was taken on d5 immediately, knight takes on d4, and now the rook comes to c8. Now, it doesn't matter how active, aggressive you want to be, how many threats for your opponent you want to create, you absolutely have to think about your development. You should be obsessed about developing your pieces, bringing all of the pieces as much as possible, as fast as possible, as active as possible. You should constantly think about it, because you cannot just take like 2 or 3 pieces of yours and just go forward making tens of moves with each of one. that just doesn't work in chess, at least starting from, let's say, 1500 rated point. But doesn't matter what your rating is, development is the key to success in chess. Rook to c8, developing a new piece, and placing your rook against your opponent's queen is always a huge thing that's always beneficial for you. Also escaping this being over here along the long diagonal. Rook e1, and now b5. So notice that with every single move, Hikaru tries to put as much pressure on his opponent as it's humanly possible. So he is attacking here on c4 now 4 times here, 2 pawns and the rook. And you cannot still do anything about it, because the knight takes, I take it back with the bishop takes here, I take it with the knight, and the pawn itself cannot do anything because it's pinned. So it's very, very problematic to have your queen on the same file with your opponent's rook. Always keep an eye on it. So as a result, we have a huge pressure on this c4 pawn, which is very difficult to handle. Well, white goes back to the main principles. Development is always a key. Bishop to b2. The bishop is going to be a fantastic piece here, but it doesn't solve the problem. What do you do with the c4 pawn? Rook e8. Before doing that, there's also a very instructive, kind of advanced lesson you can learn from Hikaru here. He is not in a hurry to take on c4. If you have that pressure, and it's only you who can release it, because remember, white has absolutely no way to take anything to solve this problem somehow. So you can just wait, because if you release the pressure, it's going to be simpler for your opponent to handle. So instead, you make a useful move first, just leaving this opportunity for later, and then the entire pressure is on your opponent. He still should think, okay, on every move it's gonna happen. It might happen, but I never know when it's happening. And then it makes it much more difficult to handle. That is exactly what Hikaru makes. And of course, just finishing the development is always nice. The bishop is protected now, the rook is active. Remember that the rooks always love the open files. So, queen d1. Now, to finally deal with somehow with this problem along the c file with this pin on c4, white has to go back with the queen, which is of course not desirable from a development perspective. You never want, once you have developed your piece, just to go back. But you see, it's the best move here according to the computer. If that is the case, then I would argue that something went wrong for white in this opening if you have to make moves like that. At some point, you should use your chance. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. Once the queen is gone, it's now a threat to take on b5. So once again, once your opponent makes a move, you should forget about whatever you were thinking and think what's going to happen afterwards. What is the idea behind that move? What has changed in the position? Now the pawn is hanging multiple times. So of course, it's time to take on c4. And then not just taking on c4, but developing the last piece that hasn't moved yet on the board, the queen. Notice that every single one of black pieces is developed, and that is the key. Like, some guys are telling in the comments, like, why do you always tell the development is the key? Everybody knows it, it's so simple, it's so obvious. Stop telling that. No, I'm gonna never stop doing that, because the guy with white, Mikhail Krasenkov, he has written multiple books about chess. He is almost 2700 rated player. I mean, he's literally in the top 100 best players in the world. And look at this position. He's playing as white, even though the position is still around balanced. I mean, the engine is not screaming anything spectacular. But just look at the pieces. Black has already developed absolutely every single one of the pieces, whereas white had to waste that time with the queen going back and forth, so the queen is not developed once again, and this rook on a1 still hasn't moved. I mean, how on earth is it possible, you would say? All know the development is the keys to success, but it's also very important to use this knowledge in every single one of your games. First, trying to develop all of your pieces as fast as possible and as active as possible. And secondly, trying to prevent your opponent from doing that. That is a huge thing, because if you are succeeding with that, well, the way to do that is to create as much pressure on your opponent, is to create as many threats for your opponent as it's humanly possible. Because if you attack him, then maybe he doesn't have time to develop his pieces, he has to somehow deal with your threats. To sum it all up, if you are playing as black and you're able to develop all of your pieces before your opponent, that is already a huge success and the first point to say that the game might go into your direction. So, white plays rook to b1, developing yet another piece and placing it against the opponent's queen, that seems like a great thing. But black is still the first one. Black is still in the driver's seat because it's now black to move. All of the pieces are developed, and that is the next question you should ask yourself. Once you have developed all of your pieces and all of your pieces are active, what do you do next? Well, if your opponent is still not over with his development, you should use this momentum. You should use this chance before he is ready and fully mobilized. You should use your development advantage into something active. It could be checks, captures, threats, and active moves. You remember the golden formula. It works always, no matter whether your rating is 0 or 3000. You always go for something active. If you have an opportunity, you always go forward. Notice that Hikaru didn't make a single move backwards here, and as far as I remember, he's not going to. So let's see what he played here. He took the pawn on c4. Checks, captures, threats. There are no checks. Taken on c4 pawn is the only capture he has, and he's going for it because, well, it's just a free move. But of course, huge variation begin here because white plays knight to c6. That's incredible. I mean, that is a combination you're gonna learn so much from, so look at this one very, very carefully. Knight to c6. What is the justification behind it? If we are just thinking, removing everything else and thinking about this knight on c6, we will notice that it has two attackers here and just one defender. If I just take it, you take it back, I take it back, we have now exchanged two pieces from the white side and the rook from the black side. And you know that two minor pieces, are much stronger than the rook, especially in the middle game, especially if you get such a bishop for it. And now basically checkmate is coming next move. So that certainly cannot be an idea that white had in mind. So when your opponent plays knight c6, you are not just screaming, come on, you're such a fool, I'm now taking both of your pieces and the game is over. How can you be so stupid? No, you don't do that. First of all, it's not polite. Secondly, you might be the one who is stupid here, because after rook takes, maybe there is more opportunities to what white can do here, especially if white is a strong grandmaster. That should ring a bell. Maybe white has something else here, and that is exactly the case, because remember what white did first. They played rook to b1, which is placing the rook against the queen on the same file. Whenever that is the case, it should be always a bell for you. Something might happen along the diagonal. That is exactly the case here, because white plays bishop to takes f6 and threatening to take the queen. And it seems like if you are just taking it back, well, first of all, you cannot take with the bishop because the rook on e8 is hanging, so you can only take it with the bishop, but then your rook is hanging there. That's not an option. And if you go anywhere with your queen, then of course it's also bad, because I continue just taking all of your pieces away and you're completely lost. So before taking here this guy on c6, Hikaru must have thought what he's gonna do against it. And frankly, he must have done it when he took here on c4. Because knight c6 is basically the only active move that white has in this position. Remember, checks, captures, and threats. There are no checks. Captures, well, the two captures I see here is knight to c4 and rook e7. Both completely don't work, so we are coming to the threats. Knight c6 is quite a big threat because it just threatens to take the bishop for free and prepares this discover attack bishop takes f6, which is winning another piece. So you absolutely must be prepared for that. And Hikaru is. So please try to stop the video for a second and find the right move here for black, and not only just one move. It's very important in chess not just calculate for one or even two moves, but literally calculate the variation till the end when it's clear for you what the valuation of the position is. Okay, I hope you have found it. There is only one move that is good for black here. Everything else is losing, but this move is a brilliant queen takes f2 move, which wins the game pretty much on the spot. The question you might ask here is, up to which point I have to calculate the variation? Because obviously it's almost never possible to calculate till the end, frankly. And I have experienced that so much in my games, because I always try to calculate till the end until I'm absolutely sure that everything is great or is bad in some variation, and then I might disregard it. But in a real game, it's so difficult. There are so many opportunities for both sides that it's just not possible to calculate till the end. So they say you should calculate till the position clarifies, till there are no active opportunities for both sides. And you remember, active opportunities, checks, captures, and threats. Sometimes, and that is the most complicated case, when that is exactly what happens, no active moves, but there is some hidden quiet move that, well, no chance to see, but it changes the entire valuation of the variation in the end of the day. If that happens, well, you're unlucky. Of course, you should try to find that as well, but, well, we are human beings. We have our calculating limit, and besides that, we have a clock limit, because we cannot spend all of our time for just one move, unless it's just checkmating like it is here, then it's justified. So let's take a look at what happens here. First of all, if the king just goes away, then we are free to take this bishop and everything is great, we are just winning completely. So of course, the question is what's going to happen if white takes this queen, and that is exactly what happened. Now, another great move, bishop c5. Normally, if you are sacrificing the queen, you absolutely must continue giving checks, because otherwise your opponent just has an extra queen and you have absolutely zero chances. You are looking for the checks, and besides, you remember that is what you are doing in the first place, no matter what happens. Checks, capture, threats. Trust me, I'm never too tired to repeat that. So there are two possible checks, bishop c5 and rook f6. The problem with rook to f6 is that the king is going back and then it's going to hide on h1, and you're never going to be able to create any threats against it, because remember, you have just given up the entire queen for just one little pawn. So that is not a move. The second one is bishop c5, that is not allowing the king to escape, and that is exactly what we need. It cannot go to the e file as well. That's why there is only one way to go, king to f3. Well, besides going somewhere with the king, of course, white has a way to somehow block the check, but white decided that doesn't make any sense because you just lose all of those pieces there. So he took, king goes to g4, and here, once again, we continue. The same thing happens. We absolutely need to give checks. So yes, there is rook g6. That seems to just make a draw because, well, you chase the king whenever it goes. But you make such a brilliant combination, not to just give a perpetual check if you have something better. And there is something better here for black. Of course, that something must start with the checks. So you're looking at checks and you find that there is knight to e5. That connects another piece to the attack. Strong players always try to connect as many pieces to the attack as possible. Knight e5 is exactly achieving that goal because the king is now under attack, and not only that, but it's also opening up this amazing diagonal, which I hope you have guessed it, can be used by this bishop on a6, which is just waiting there for its start time. White has a few miserable choices here. Either you just take here on e5, which doesn't stop the check. The check is the only good move for black here, but good enough. Now if your king goes away, let's say to g5, then I can just take here with the check. If it goes away to h4, then I can still take it, and there is still no way to stop all possible checkmates here. Rook h6, g5 ideas are in the air. So instead of that, white played king to g5. It's still winning here for black, but you have to find an impossible move here if you are just focused on the checks. If the checks doesn't work, you are looking at captures, but capturing anything doesn't really help you, even if it's possible. It's not even possible here, because you are an entire queen down. Unless you are taking suddenly your opponent's queen, taking even a knight doesn't help. Your opponent just needs to stabilize the position and then it's over. So the only real way to fight for a win is, of course, to chase the king. The only winning move here is bishop to c8. Just connecting another piece to the attack. Once again, essential to connect as many pieces to your attack as possible. And preparing those very dangerous threats. And now, no matter what you do here, I don't know, 94, let's say, trying to be active here, then we have a checkmate. Knight to g6, king goes to h5, and the second rook joins the party with rook e5, and that's a checkmate. Now, white can be smarter and try to play g4. That would allow trying to escape there, but there is bishop f2, the only move. Now king h3, once again trying to hide from all of the checks, but of course we chase it later on and we play h5, and then g4 is hanging, the bishop is coming, we take the queen back and probably still deliver a checkmate. Okay, so that is a crazy variation, but Hikaru did even better. He played here rook to g6, immediately check, instead of that move h6, and played king to h5. And now he made a quiet move. That is the highest level in chess possible, because the first year in chess, you learn those golden principles. By the way, here I made a video which is called Chess Bible, the 50 most important principles you must know in chess. So you spend the first year or maybe two on learning and mastering those principles, and the entire life afterwards in chess you spend on mastering the exceptions to all of those rules, because every rule in chess has an exception. And this quiet move is amazing. It's f6. Now, it's just protecting this knight. It's just covering this g5 square, which is essential because now we have rook to h6 idea, checkmate. We have rook to g5 idea. That is making the whole difference. And of course, when Hikaru played queen to xf2, I mean, that is fascinating for me to know how far he has calculated in this position, but I doubt he has seen the move f6. He just felt, and at this point you need to include your intuition into your calculation process. He just felt that the king is going to be incredibly dangerously weak there, dangerously vulnerable there. And there is one little trick that might help you at this point. I would say that Hikaru calculated there until this rook g6, rook h6, rook f6 perpetual check idea, and it's just like a safety net for you. You are sure that you're going to have a draw, and you also have a feeling that, well, there is a high chance there is going to be something more than just a perpetual check. But you're sure you're not losing the game, and that's already a very good sign. That is so many strong players are using, that helps them to save so much time during their calculation. So f6 has been played, and unfortunately for white, there is absolutely no way to stop the checkmate now. They play rook to takes e5 because they try to eliminate as many attacking pieces as possible, but the next attacking piece is coming here, bishop to c8, guarding this diagonal, connecting as many pieces as possible. Unfortunately, only this guy cannot take part, at least for now, but it's not needed because checkmate is coming and white resigned here. Possible variation here could be bishop to d5 check, just sacrificing this bishop, g4 trying to escape with the king, rook to d3 guarding those squares. Look at how black is just not allowing this king to escape. He's saying, I'm gonna give you everything I have, all of the money, just let me escape. And black says, no mercy for you, mister. You're gonna be checkmated right here and right there. White can sacrifice everything they have, but checkmate is still coming here. Bishop f2. Finally, this bishop is also taking part and delivering a checkmate. Now it's time to apply the knowledge you have learned throughout this video in this amazing example from Hikaru Nakamura's career. It's white to move. Try to play like Hikaru Nakamura, and please let me know in the comments what is your solution in the comments. But remember, it's not only about just one move, but about this variation, about finding your opponent's opportunities. White to move, white to win. Write in the comments. Now, if you want to discover how it actually feels to play a real tournament game against such a calculation monster as Hikaru Nakamura himself, as well as find out what he said about me after the game that completely shocked me, this video is right there for you.